My granddaughter thought I had chosen to forget her. Let that settle before we go any further. Not that I was busy, not that I was traveling, not that I had gotten older and slowed down. She believed was told that I had decided she was not worth the drive anymore. That the man who had taken her to the farmer's market every Saturday morning, since she was 3 years old, who had a specific shelf in his study lined with books, chosen one at a time for a little girl who was learning to love reading, who had taught her how to press flowers between the pages of a dictionary, because her grandmother had taught me, and I had been waiting years for someone to teach it to. That man had simply stopped caring. She was 8 years old. She had been living with that for 9 months when I found out. I was sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon in March when my neighbor Frank Calloway called me. Frank is 71, a retired high school football coach, and not a man who calls to chat. When his name appeared on my screen, I answered on the second ring. He said he needed to tell me something he had overheard, and that I should probably be sitting down. I was already sitting. It didn't help. Welcome. My name is Arthur Milligan. I am 68 years old. I live in Roanoke, Virginia, in the same house I have owned for 26 years. I have one son, Thomas, who is 43. I have one granddaughter, Sophie, who is 8, and who has her mother's stubbornness and my late wife's eyes and a way of paying attention to the world that tells me she is going to be someone remarkable when the world finally gets to meet all of her. Thomas and his girlfriend, Renata, have been together for 6 years. They are not married. I want to be precise about that because it matters to what came later. Renata is 38 years old. She is an office manager at a dental practice, and she runs her household the way I imagine she runs that office, which is to say, efficiently, completely, and with very little tolerance for things that fall outside her system. She was not, when I first met her, someone I found unreasonable. She was organized and capable and clearly devoted to Sophie in the functional ways that matter. I did not dislike her. I want to say that clearly, because clarity is the only fair way to tell a story about someone who hurt my family, even someone who did what she did. What Renata could not tolerate, as I came to understand it, was being corrected, not challenged, not disagreed with, corrected. Specifically corrected by me, in front of Thomas, about something she had already decided. The moment that became the fault line between us happened in September of the year before everything fell apart. Thomas had enrolled Sophie in a reading program at a learning center that a colleague of Renata's had recommended. The program was expensive and had a specific methodology that I recognized because I had spent 33 years as an elementary school principal and had seen that methodology come in and out of fashion several times across my career. I had reviewed the research on it. The research was not strong. I said so, at their kitchen table, one evening after dinner, with Thomas sitting across from me and Renata beside him, and Sophie in the other room watching television. I said it the way I said most things, which is directly and without softening, because in my professional life, softening a concern about a child's education had never served the child. I told them the research didn't support the price, that there were better options, and that I could send them what I had read if they wanted to look it over. Renata looked at me for a moment. Then she smiled and said she appreciated my perspective. The smile did not reach her eyes. Thomas changed the subject. 2 weeks later, they kept Sophie in the program. 6 months after that, Sophie was showing me exactly the kind of reading plateaus the research had predicted. I did not say I told you so. I had learned, in 33 years of working with parents, that being right and being heard are two entirely different things, and that arriving with the second requires patience the first rarely allows. But Renata knew that I knew, and I believe that knowing was what she could not forgive. The withdrawal began in November. It was not announced. That is the detail I need you to hold, because the quiet nature of it is what made it so effective for so long. There was no conversation, no confrontation, no phone call where terms were stated. There was simply a Saturday morning in November when I drove to their house to take Sophie to the farmer's market, as I had done every Saturday for 5 years, and Thomas met me at the door and said Sophie wasn't feeling well. She had seemed fine when I'd spoken to her on the phone 2 days before, but children get sick quickly. I said of course, told him to give her my love, and drove home. The following Saturday, there was a birthday party. The Saturday after that, they were visiting Renata's sister in Charlottesville. The Saturday after that, Thomas texted at 7 in the morning to say something had come up. I am a man who ran a school for 3 decades. I know how a calendar is managed, and I know the difference between a schedule that is full and a schedule that has been made full. I called Thomas the following week and asked, directly, whether everything was all right. He said things were a little complicated at home. He asked for some space. The word landed with the specific weight of something that has already been decided, not something that is being worked through. I gave space. In December, I mailed Sophie a Christmas card with a small gift card and a handwritten note. I wrote it 4 times before I got it right. I wanted her to feel completely certain that I was thinking of her, without making her feel pulled in any direction. The card was not acknowledged. When I asked Thomas, 3 weeks later, whether Sophie had received it, he said she had. She had not called. She had not sent a note. Sophie, who had never in her life received a letter without producing a handwritten response within 48 hours, had not sent a word. That absence told me something that no adult in her household was going to say out loud. In January, I drove to the house on a Sunday afternoon with a bag of library books I had set aside for Sophie over the preceding weeks, books I had chosen with the particular attention of someone who had spent a career matching children to the right story at the right moment. Thomas's truck was in the driveway. The front porch light was on in the way it is on when people are home and not expecting anyone. I knocked. I waited. I knocked again. I could hear the television inside. I stood at that door for 2 minutes, which is long enough to understand that the door is not going to open and long enough to feel the full meaning of why it won't. I walked back to my car. I sat in it for a little while. Then I drove home and I made a decision. I opened a notebook, a plain green spiral notebook I had purchased at a drugstore, and I began to write. Every date, every attempt, every unanswered call and returned card and closed door. I wrote it in the way I had written incident logs for 33 years, which is to say factually, specifically, and without editorializing. A principal learns early that feelings do not hold up in a meeting. Documentation does. February through June passed the way that kind of time passes, which is slowly and with a specific weight to each week that does not ease. I called Thomas once a month. He answered roughly half the time and said, each time, some version of the same thing, that Renata needed more time, that things were complicated, that he was sorry. I began to hear the sorry the way you hear a word repeated so many times it loses its meaning. It becomes a sound, a placeholder, something a person offers because they cannot offer the thing that would actually help. I sent Sophie a birthday card in April with a pressed flower inside, a violet from my garden, because pressing flowers was the thing we had done together, and I wanted her to know the person who had taught her was still doing it and still thinking of her. I did not know if she received it. I did not know what she was being told about why the Saturday mornings had stopped. I did not yet know what she had been told about me at all. In June, Thomas called. 8 minutes. He said he was sorry. He said Renata felt strongly that space was what the family needed. He said he hoped I could understand. I told him I loved him and that I was going to be honest with him, which was that what he was describing was not a family needing space. It was a child being separated from a grandparent who had done nothing to warrant it, and that there was a difference. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he knew. He said it quietly, the way a person says something they have known for a long time and have been hoping would stop being true. He said he knew, and then he said he needed more time, and we ended the call, and I sat at my kitchen table in the house I have lived in for 26 years and looked at the shelf in my study through the open doorway, the shelf with Sophie's books. 31 books, chosen one at a time over 5 years. I had added 2 more in the months since the Saturdays stopped, because I could not stop choosing them. I did not know if she would ever sit in that room again and read them, but I could not stop choosing them, so I didn't. In August, I stopped calling Thomas. Not because I had given up, because I had been a principal long enough to understand that when a conversation cannot move forward through the channel you have been using, you do not keep using that channel. You find the one that can. I had been speaking with a family law attorney named Beverly Cook since March. Beverly is 62, has been practicing family and estate law in Roanoke for 28 years, and has the particular quality of someone who has sat across from every variation of human behavior in a family dispute, and has long ago decided that calm is more powerful than anything else in the room. I had told her everything in March, the same way I imagine you tell a doctor about a symptom completely, in order, without leaving out the parts that don't reflect well on you. She had listened. She had asked 3 questions. She had told me to keep the notebook and to be patient, and that we were building something, and that what we were building would matter when the time came to use it. The time came on a Tuesday in March when Frank Calloway called me in a grocery store parking lot and told me what he had overheard. Frank lives on the corner lot 2 streets from Thomas and Renata's house. He had been walking his dog past the elementary school that afternoon and had stopped to speak with another man he knew from the neighborhood whose grandchild went to the same school. While they were talking, Sophie came out of the building with a group of other children. The other man knew Sophie by sight and waved at her. Sophie waved back, but did not stop. When the other man asked Frank if he knew the little girl, Frank said yes, that was his neighbor's granddaughter, that her grandfather was a good man named Arthur Milligan. Frank told me that Sophie, upon hearing my name, had stopped walking, had turned around, had looked at Frank with the particular expression of a child hearing something that does not align with what she has been told is true, and had said, quietly, that her grandfather Arthur didn't want to see her anymore, that he had decided she was too much trouble, that her mom had explained it to her. Frank said the other man looked at him. Frank looked at the other man. Sophie walked to her mother's car. Frank went home and called me. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after the call ended. The engine was off. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the parking lot was doing what parking lots do, carts being pushed, cars pulling in and out, to a completely ordinary Tuesday in a world that did not know that an 8-year-old girl had been carrying for 9 months the belief that her grandfather had decided she wasn't worth his time. I thought about the first Saturday we went to the farmer's market. She had been 3 years old and had insisted on carrying the canvas bag herself, dragging it along the ground because she could not hold it high enough to keep it from hitting the pavement, refusing every offer of help with the certainty of a toddler who has decided to do something and is not interested in assistance. I thought about the afternoon. She helped me press the first flower, a yellow daisy from the backyard. She had placed it between the pages of the dictionary with the focused deliberateness of a child performing a ceremony, and then had put both palms flat on the cover and pressed down with the full weight of her small body and looked up at me and asked how long it would take. I told her a few weeks. She had checked every 3 days. I thought about what she had been told, that I had decided she was too much trouble, the specificity of it. Not that I was sick, not that I was gone, that I had looked at her and made a calculation and concluded she wasn't worth the effort. I sat in that parking lot. I was not crying. I was in the specific stillness that comes after a blow when the body is absorbing it and the mind is deciding what to do next. Then I started the car and called Beverly. I was in Beverly's office within the hour. I told her what Frank had heard. She set down her pen and looked at me with the expression of a person who has been practicing family law for 28 years and still finds certain things worth a moment of human response before the professional response. He follows. She said she was sorry. She let that sit. Then she moved into what I needed, which was not sympathy. It was strategy. She said that what Renata had told Sophie, that I had chosen to abandon her, was a deliberate and documented act of parental alienation, and that combined with the 11 months of records in my notebook, we had the foundation for a formal petition for grandparent visitation rights under Virginia law. She said we needed to move before Renata had any indication that we were moving. She said that whatever I was considering doing in the next 24 hours, it needed to be legally clean, centered visibly on Sophie's well-being, and incapable of being characterized as hostile or destabilizing. I told her what I was considering. She looked at me for a long moment with the expression of a lawyer assessing both the legal and the human question at the same time. Then she told me to go home, bring the notebook in the morning, and be ready to move by 10. I went home. I pulled the green notebook from the drawer where it had lived for 11 months. I added Frank's call. Date, time, what was said, word for word, as I remembered it. I organized every text message I had sent Thomas and printed them. I printed the call log. I found the returned birthday card. It had come back unopened in May, which I had noted in the notebook with the date, and I put it in the folder. I located the record of every farmer's market Saturday for 5 years that I had noted in my personal calendar, because that is the kind of man I am, the kind who writes things down, not because he expected to need them in a legal context, but because 33 years of running a school taught him that the unrecorded thing is the thing that disappears. I went to bed at midnight. I slept 4 hours. I was at Beverly's office at 8:50. We worked for 90 minutes. Then she told me to go to the school. Here is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that I have not told anyone except Beverly and, later, my son. Clover Hill Elementary School. Sophie had attended it since kindergarten. It was 4 miles from my house, and I had driven past it several hundred times in 5 years. I had attended 2 school performances there when Thomas and Renata had invited me before the invitations stopped. And my name was on the emergency contact form. It had been there since Sophie's first day of kindergarten, placed there by Thomas before the complications began, and it had never been removed. People get busy. Forms get filed. Nobody had thought to update a contact list. I am told this is more common than people realize. I arrived at 11:30 on a Wednesday morning. I was wearing a jacket and slacks, which I had chosen deliberately, because I was a school principal for 33 years, and I understand that the way you enter a school building communicates something before you have said a word. I wanted to communicate exactly what I was, a grandfather with standing, with composure, and with nothing to hide. I walked to the front office. I gave my name. I said I was Sophie Milligan's grandfather, and that I was listed as an authorized contact, and that I was there to sign her out for a family appointment. The woman behind the desk, professional, efficient, the manner of someone who has worked a school front office for many years and has developed the judgment that comes with it, looked at her screen. She confirmed my name. She asked whether Sophie would need a note for her absence. I told her she would be back the following morning. She called the classroom. I stood at the counter and looked at a bulletin board beside the window. Artwork. A student council announcement. A lost and found notice. The ordinary surface of an elementary school on a Wednesday morning in March. Sophie came through the door 4 minutes later. She was looking at the floor, the way children look at the floor when they have been called out of class unexpectedly and are not sure what they are walking into. Then she looked up. She saw me. She stood completely still. Not for a long time. For the single moment a person needs when the world has just placed something in front of them that their version of reality had marked as impossible. Her grandfather, standing in her school office on a Wednesday morning in March. The grandfather who had decided she was too much trouble. She looked at me and I looked at her, and then she crossed that office at a pace I can only describe as controlled running, which is what happens when a child wants desperately to run, but is in a place that has always told her to walk. She put her arms around me, and I put my arms around her, and neither one of us said anything because there was nothing yet that needed to be said. The woman at the front desk found something requiring her complete attention on the far side of her computer screen. We stood there for a little while. Then I signed the form. I thanked the woman at the desk. Sophie took my hand, and we walked out of that building into a Wednesday afternoon in March that felt nothing like a Wednesday afternoon in March. There was a diner 3 blocks from the school, the kind with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that has been on since before the morning rush. We took a booth near the window. Sophie ordered hot chocolate and a grilled cheese sandwich, which she had always ordered, which she had ordered at this same diner 2 years before when I had taken her after a school play. I ordered coffee and a turkey sandwich I did not touch. We talked about school, about a science project on weather patterns that she was 2 weeks from finishing, about a book she was reading that she said was about a girl who raised a baby owl, and whether I thought owls made good pets. I told her that depended almost entirely on the owl. She considered this seriously and said she thought she would want to ask the owl first. I told her that was exactly the right approach. I did not ask about her mother. I did not ask about what she had been told or for how long. She was 8 years old and she had been carrying something heavy for 9 months, and my job in that diner was not to add to the weight. My job was to let her remember what it felt like to put it down. When her hot chocolate came, she wrapped both hands around the mug the way she had always done, the specific habit of a child who finds warmth satisfying in a physical way, and she looked at me over the top of it and said she had thought I didn't want to see her anymore. She said it plainly, in the way children sometimes say enormous things plainly because they have not yet learned that enormous things are supposed to require a build-up. I told her that was not true, that it had never been true, that there was no version of any day in which I would decide she was too much trouble. I told her about the shelf, the 31 books, the 2 I had added after the Saturdays stopped. I told her about the pressed flowers still in the dictionary, that I had added 7 more since last spring and had saved each one thinking of her. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded the way she nodded when something confirmed what she had believed underneath the thing she had been told. She went back to her hot chocolate. I sent one text to Beverly. Beverly had been on an open call since I walked into that school. The text said simply that I would be needing her shortly. Beverly replied that she was ready. Renata called at 2:27. The phone rang on the table between us. Sophie saw the screen and looked at me with the expression of a child positioned between two adults and unsure which way safety lies. I told her everything was fine and I would step outside. She nodded. I walked to the short hallway near the back of the diner, far enough that Sophie would not hear the specifics of what was about to happen. I answered. What I heard in the next 60 seconds was the voice of a woman who had believed herself to be in complete control of a situation, discovering with full force that she was not. She used the word lawyer twice. She used the word police once. She said I had taken Sophie without permission, which was not accurate, and said it in the specific way of someone constructing a version of events quickly and not checking it against what the school's own sign-out log would show. I waited for her to reach the end of what she had prepared. When she did, I said 3 things clearly and without hurry. I said Sophie was safe, was with her grandfather, and would be home by 5. I said that my attorney, Beverly Cook, was currently in her office with 11 months of documentation, a contact log, a green notebook with dates going back to November, a returned birthday card sent to an 8-year-old child and never delivered, and a signed statement from a neighbor who had heard Sophie explain that her grandfather had chosen to abandon her. And I said that Beverly was available to speak with Renata's attorney at any time she chose to retain one. Then I put the phone on speaker. Beverly, who had been on the open line since I walked into that school building and whose office had been recording since before I gave my name at the front desk, said her name. She said she represented Arthur Milligan. She said her office had been documenting the situation for some time. She said she looked forward to speaking with Renata's legal representative at their earliest convenience. She said it in the tone she uses, I would learn later, when she wants to communicate complete readiness without a trace of aggression. The call ended. I stood in that back hallway for a moment. Then I walked to the booth. Sophie was drawing on the paper placemat with a pen from my jacket pocket that she had located without asking, which was exactly what she had always done. I sat down and finished my coffee, which had gone cold but which I finished anyway, because I am a person who finishes things. Thomas called that evening. His voice had the quality of a man who has been given one version of an afternoon and suspects it is not the complete version and is calling to find the rest of it. He was not angry at me. He was something more complicated, which was a 43-year-old man who had spent 9 months telling himself that the situation in his home would resolve on its own, and who was now understanding that it had not resolved, it had compounded, and that a decision he had avoided making had made itself. We talked for a long time. He told me he had not known what Sophie had been told. He had known that the access had been cut, had known it was wrong, had told himself it was temporary, had allowed temporary to become 9 months. He had not asked the specific question, the one that would have required him to stand in his own house and insist on an answer. He had not asked what his daughter was being told about her grandfather when he was not in the room. He was sorry. He said it knowing it was not sufficient, and knowing I knew that too. And the knowing was in his voice alongside the word, which is the only way sorry means anything. I told him I received it. I told him what came next was not going to be simple, because Beverly had a folder, and the folder had a destination, and where it went depended on what the next 30 days looked like. He said he understood. He sounded like a man who had just understood something he should have understood sooner, and who was not going to make the mistake of not understanding it again. Beverly filed the petition for grandparent visitation rights the following week. Virginia law provides standing in circumstances like mine. She did not file it because she expected it to reach a courtroom. She filed it because a filed petition with 11 months of supporting documentation produces a kind of clarity in a family dispute that no private conversation has ever achieved. It says, the informal phase is finished. Within 5 days of receiving the petition, Renata's attorney called Beverly. He suggested mediation. Beverly agreed. There were 2 sessions. The first was careful and slow, both sides measuring the room. The second was where the real work happened. The agreement that came out of it was formal, notarized, and specific in every term. First and third Saturday of each month, with Sophie, from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. 4 consecutive weeks in the summer, dates confirmed by March 1st of each year. A rotating holiday schedule through 2031. And a clause that Beverly had drafted herself, and that Renata's attorney accepted without revision, which told me that he had read the documentation thoroughly and had advised his client accordingly. The clause stated that neither parent would make any statement to Sophie regarding her grandfather's feelings toward her, his interest in her, his relationship with the family, or his desire for contact that was not accurate and verifiable. That Sophie would not be used as a means of communicating anything between the adults, and that any violation would constitute grounds for immediate modification of the agreement and additional legal action. Beverly had written it in language clear enough that an 8-year-old could read it and understand it. I had asked her to. She had. Sophie came to my house on the first Saturday of the new agreement. Thomas drove her. He walked her to the door and looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who has more to say than he is going to say on a doorstep. I told him we would talk. He nodded. Sophie came inside. She went directly to the study. I followed. She stood in front of the shelf and read the spines slowly, the way she reads everything, with full attention. She counted. I watched her count. She turned and looked at me and said there were more books than she remembered. I told her I had kept adding them. She asked if I had added them even after the Saturdays stopped. I told her every month. She looked at the shelf for another moment. Then she selected one, the one on the end that I had added most recently, a story about a girl who maps an uncharted island, and she sat down on the floor of my study with her back against the bookcase in the way she had always sat, and she opened to page 1. I sat in the chair across from her. Outside, it was a Saturday morning in March, the kind that makes no promises about the afternoon but is good enough right now. I made no promises about the afternoon either. I just sat there, in my own study, in my own house, in the particular quiet of a room where someone small is reading something good and the person who chose the book for her is close enough to hear the pages turn. If you are a grandparent who has been pushed out, I want to say this to you directly, grandparent to grandparent. The relationship you built with that child is not something anyone assigned to you. You built it, Saturday by Saturday, book by book, pressed flower by pressed flower. It belongs to both of you, and it does not stop belonging to both of you because someone decided to interrupt it. Get the attorney. Open the notebook today, this evening, right now. Write down every date, every attempt, every door that did not open, every card that was not acknowledged. Write it the way you would write it if you knew someone was going to read it carefully someday, because someone is. The notebook is what transforms a grandfather who has been wronged into a grandfather who can prove it. Those are two very different things. And if you have been told, or if your grandchild has been told, something about you that is not true, understand this. The truth has a way of coming back. It comes back in the form of a child who stops walking when she sees you standing in her school office. It comes back in the form of a small girl reading a book you chose for her on the floor of a room where her shelf has been waiting. You are not forgotten. You are not optional. You are their grandparent. Nobody has the power to erase that permanently. They only have the power to delay it. And the delay ends the moment you decide that it does. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you know a grandparent who never stopped showing up, name them in the comments. Those people deserve to be said out loud.